Hi ladies, in this episode we are going to talk about gut health. So it is such a broad topic, but I will try to cover as much of it as I can. And we're going to start with the question of why is my gut health so important? Gut health has had so much airtime in recent years, and for a really good reason. So basically, many of us don't realize that we house an entire ecosystem inside our intestine. It's really weird to think about, but we are made up of more bacteria than we are human cells. So our gut bacteria can actually weigh up to 2 kilos, which is a lot. And in that amount, we have about 10 to 1. So our bacteria outnumbers our human cells by about 10 to 1. So if you can imagine just how much bacteria that is residing inside you, is pretty phenomenal. The best way to understand why it's important is when we realize that we have all of this bacteria not only living inside us, we also have bacteria coating our skin, the insides of our nose, our vagina, our mouths, our eye. Like, we have bacteria all over us. And their primal focus across the board is to help to support our immune system, right? So when we think about it in that way, that we have all of these little bacteria living inside and around us, we therefore, in a weird way, become the ecosystem or the home for those bacteria. So I know that sounds weird, but it helps us to understand why it's so important. So if we look at nature, for example, if we create a poor environment for nature to flourish and grow, things will die, plants will die, animals will die. Same thing happens in our system. If we're not nurturing our system with good food, with enough rest, with not being stressed, and all of these things, then we can flourish and nurture a really good ecosystem for the bacteria which support our body and help to keep us healthy. So I hope that makes sense. When we're in our mother's womb, we have 0 bacteria. So nothing is there, we're completely clean of bacteria. And then when our mother gives birth to us, whether that be through a cesarean or through a natural birth, the baby then ingests bacteria either through the vaginal canal or through the skin and the bacteria that is around the stomach if it is through a C-section. And that is the baby's first ingestion of bacteria into its system. And there is plenty of research out there. This just shows you how important it is. Plenty of research out there that then navigates and shows the difference between natural birth and C-section babies and what they can develop or become exposed to as a matter of what bacteria is inside their system due to that birthing process. So that kind of stimulates your first immune response to life. And then the milk in your mother's milk gives us the fiber and the nutrients required to allow the good bacteria to grow. So once again, sometimes people, for whatever reason, can't breastfeed and they have to put their babies onto formula straight away. That can also impact the way the baby's bacteria develops. And I'm not saying there are some things that are worse than others, but it can always be rectified. I'm just saying that there are so many things early on in life which can really affect the way our bacteria grows and develops. As we develop as human beings, we then experience stress. We might go through really bad periods of eating really badly, really poor foods, and that will affect our gut bacteria. And then we may have times in our lives where we've taken a lot of antibiotics, and that will really affect our bacteria as well. So just know that we are the home of all of these trillions of bacteria, and it is our responsibility to provide the best ecosystem we can in order to allow them to flourish in the right way. How do I know if my body maybe isn't housing the best bacteria for me? There are many symptoms to look out for that might show that your microbiome is off. So some really basic ones are IBS symptoms, so irritable bowel syndrome. So this is things like constipation, diarrhea, constipation, then diarrhea, having loose bowels all the time, having pain when you're passing a bowel movement. It can also be increased bloating, a lot of flatulence, excessive burping, heartburn, reflux. All of these types of symptoms are symptoms that there might be something a little off with your gut bacteria. For women, we tend to also have, when we know that we have an overgrowth of candida, which is quite common for a lot of women, we will also have the symptom of thrush. So we'll have thrush, and sometimes the thrush can also appear in our mouth. So we'll have like a thick white discharge that will appear either from our vagina or in our mouth, which is a sign that we have an overgrowth of candida in our system, which is required in all of our systems, but when it becomes overgrown, it can cause a lot of other health implications for us. So be mindful first of those initial symptoms. So upset stomach, constant diarrhea, really long prolonged periods of constipation, thrush, any kind of issues like that are directly associated, bloating, reflux, etc. But then it goes deeper than that. So sometimes we can also have things, what we call like a brain fog. So not being able to concentrate, even though you've eaten, you've slept well, etc. That can be a link back to your gut health. Psoriasis and eczema and skin conditions, they can also be linked back to certain types and strains of bacteria that are either too much of or not enough of in your system. Generally speaking, when you take an antibiotic or you take a course of antibiotics or multiple courses, you will then need to rectify what's going on in your system. Because if our gut bacteria is off for any reason, as in we've got too much of one and not enough of the other, it will impact our overall health. And what's important to know here is that it's not like it's just one type across the board. We have multiple strains or families of types of bacteria, and all of those strains or families play different roles inside our body. They all aim to protect and support our immune system as well as our inflammatory response of our system, and they all break down foods for us. So their primary source of food is fiber. So our bacteria help to break down the food that we ingest. They tell our brain and our body about pathogens which enter our system. They help to produce some of our vitamins and minerals that we require. And they also have this amazing connection to our brain, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if this is off, your body will tell you, and a lot of the time, even symptoms of depression and anxiety due to the gut-brain connection can be interlinked and can tell us that there's something going on with our gut. So there's some of the symptoms to look out for. If you do have any of these symptoms, I would highly recommend working with someone like myself or a practitioner who can help you to further identify and rectify those things that are going on for you. What's the link between our gut and our brain? So a lot of you may have heard of this thing called the gut-brain axis. And it's something that has been researched in recent years, and it tells us so much about how the two are closely intertwined and closely related to one another. So all we need to know is when we talked about stress, for example, we know that when we're stressed, it affects our digestive system and vice versa. So they have this intricate connection to one another where the bacteria that live inside our intestine have this ability to then speak through our nervous system and communicate with our brain. So it's something like, when I'm stressed, I'm not hungry. When I'm nervous, I get butterflies in my tummy. It's the two of them connecting to each other and sending signals and messages to one another. So the reason why this can affect us and our mental health, to put really simply, is that if our gut bacteria is compromised in any way, or we don't have the right ones there, it can affect our state of health. So there have been many research studies done that look at certain strains of probiotics or certain strains of bacteria and how they impact someone's ability to be resilient, to reduce stress, to not have as much anxiety. And the interesting thing here is that when someone suffers with IBS, for example, irritable bowel syndrome, whether it be constipation dominant or whether it be diarrhea dominant, they will often find a correlation between IBS patients and them also suffering with anxiety or depression. and vice versa. So if someone presents with anxiety or depression, it's highly likely they also have something going on inside their intestine and with the bacteria living inside their gut. And when you fix the gut, often those feelings of anxiety or stress also tend to disappear. So really important thing to note there, and therefore that kind of feeling of overwhelm or panic, it's like a catch-22. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. When we're stressed or anxious, it can affect the makeup of our microbiome, but in saying that, by eating poor foods and not looking after our microbiome, it can cause us to be stressed or anxious. So just bear that in mind when you are looking at the foods and what you are consuming in your diet. So what foods are we going to incorporate into our diet to support our microbiome? When it comes to food, our gut bacteria, our good gut bacteria, thrive off fiber, and that is fiber which usually comes from plants. So hence the whole plant-based diet movement. It's really good for our gut health. It doesn't mean you need to become a vegan. You can definitely still incorporate your meats and seafoods and things like that, but it does mean increasing the amounts of fiber that you're consuming in your diet, because that is their preferred source of food and fuel, and it encourages the good guys to grow strong and to protect you and support your immune system. So anything, all of your vegetables, things like legumes, grains, beans, brown rices, pulses, all of those types of things are fantastic to feed and act as prebiotics for the probiotics which live inside your intestine. You may have heard that fermented foods are really good as well to support your bacteria, your good bacteria, and this is definitely true unless you have a reaction to fermented foods. So some people who suffer with histamine issues can't actually tolerate fermented foods. So this is just something to bear in mind. If your best friend always drinks kombucha and eats sauerkraut and all this type of thing and they feel really good on it, then you try it and you have a reaction to it, I would strongly recommend that fermented foods are not for you. If you can tolerate them okay, then yes, they are great to incorporate into your diet. And fermented foods are things like kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh, miso, kefirs, kombucha, and all of these things you can actually make from home, and they're very inexpensive to make. So I will include a really simple sauerkraut recipe that you guys will be sent, and it literally uses 2 ingredients. So it's so simple and it's so easy, and it's a great thing to add into sandwiches and salads and have on top of scrambled eggs, and just to try and include a few more of those really gut-loving, promoting probiotics into your system. So fiber, so plants, increasing plants, and then having fermented foods if they work well for you. Decreasing processed sugars, decreasing like high amounts of hydrogenated oils and trans fats. The body, the gut does not like those, and trying to decrease stress is going to be really important for looking after your microbiome. A lot of you may be wondering about probiotics and whether or not probiotics are an essential part of your supplement regime. The thing with probiotics, so when I was studying nutritional medicine a long time ago, when we were studying, there was only the initial research of this stuff coming out. So we were told as practitioners that the best thing to take is a multi-strain, high-dose probiotic, right? So that was back when I was at uni. Now, however, so much research has come out, and as I mentioned before, different strains of probiotics affect different elements of our health. So, for example, someone who has barley belly, what we call here, or an upset stomach from eating a type of food that causes them to have diarrhea and symptoms like that, will require a different strain of bacteria or probiotic to someone who is presenting with psoriasis, for example. Same thing goes for someone who's been taking antibiotics. They will have a different strain versus someone who has IBS symptoms. So these different symptoms are a reaction of different strains of probiotics which are less in your system and need replenishing, and that's where probiotics come into play. So once again, I do recommend working with a practitioner, or even going into your naturopath or your nutritionist or the pharmacy that is closest to you, which has a good range, and talking to someone there about your symptoms to find the strain that is most suitable for you. That wraps everything up for today, guys. I really hope you've learned something about all the little microbiome and bacteria that live inside our intestine and how to support them in the best way possible so that they can support you to keep healthy and well.